Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and today is day 3 of the spoiler season for Outlaws of Thunder Junction. We have a ton of cards to get through. We're going to try and blaze through the commons super quick so that we can get to the juicy stuff. One last thing I would like to ask before we get started though, if you wouldn't mind hitting that like button, it really does help a ton. It would really help me get this video out to so many more people, and I work really hard on these videos, so I would appreciate it more than I can possibly express with words. Also, if you find any value in these videos, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss one. I've got tons of spoiler content on the way, and some really cool deck techs, so do the damn thing. And with that out of the way, let's get started. Our first card here is Gold Pan, 2 mana for an artifact equipment. When it enters the battlefield, create a treasure token, and then it equips for just 1 mana. So this is actually pretty decent limited just as a way to fix your mana if you're playing like a 3-color deck. You know, get out that card that you don't have the color for yet, give you some time to get to a land of that color, and then it leaves behind a little bit of extra value in the form of this equipment that can equip for 1 to buff a dude. So not too bad in limited. Next up we have Razzle Dazzler. Razzle Dazzler. 1 blue and 1 for a 1/2 human wizard. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on Razzle Dazzler. It can't be blocked this turn. This guy's mainly limited fodder here, but it's worth noting he's going to be halfway decent in the plot decks, because if you're plotting cards to cast later, it's going to be a lot easier for you to cast one for free and then cast the thing you're using your mana on and be able to double spell. So there is a little bit of value to be had there, so keep that in mind, but this is mostly limited fodder here. Next up we have Tumbleweed Rising, 1 green and 1 for a sorcery. Create an XX green elemental creature token where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Plot for 1 green and 2. So you get a big thing. If you already have a big thing, you can plot this so that it's sitting there waiting to be cast later for free, so that after you drop your big 5-drop or whatever, that exact same turn, you just cast this for 0, get a 5/5, a 6/6, whatever it is. So that's pretty cool. I think if you're in the, you know, power matters archetype in limited, where you're really putting a lot of power on the field, the value of this is going to go up, and you might want to keep it in mind when drafting. Next up we have Patient Naturalist, 1 green and 2 for a 2/3 human scout. When it enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards, put a land card from among the mill cards into your hand, and if you can't, you create a treasure card. This is pretty decent fixing and or ramp, right? Chances are you find a land, and you know, there's a chance it might be the color you need, it might not be the color you need, but if you don't hit a land, you can make a treasure, and that can be any color you need. That can sort of get that spell out of your hand that you don't have the land for yet, you know, and buy you some time to get to a point where you eventually draw the land you need to start casting stuff of that color. So another decent piece of limited fodder here for helping to mana fix in 3-color decks in limited. Next up, Bristlepack Sentry, 1 green and 1 for a 3/3 plant wolf with Defender. I love that it's a plant because Insidious Roots. As long as you control a creature with power 4 or greater, it can attack as though it didn't have Defender. This is pretty standard. It's a pretty staple. We normally see this in blue, but having it in green is pretty interesting. And having it turn on, you know, with power 4, it means that green in limited is probably really focused on having big dudes, which, you know, is typical. Next up, Mine Raider, 1 red and 2 for a 3/2 human rogue with trample, which isn't bad. When he enters the battlefield, if you control another outlaw, you get to create a treasure token. I actually think this is one of the better commons we've seen so far. The body is decent on rate, especially with that trample keyword added in, and having a good chance of making a treasure token as long as you're building into the right archetype in limited. You know, I think really kind of puts this over the top. So it's not like a top pick or anything, but it is better than the other commons we've seen so far, and might see some play in a decent amount of limited decks. Next up we have Reckless Lackey, 1 red for a 1/2 first strike haste goblin pirate. You can also pay 1 red and 2 and sacrifice him to draw a card and create a treasure token. I think this guy's just gas. In limited at least. He might even see play in mono red. He might not, because the 1 power without a way to boost it, no prowess or anything like that. Not so sure. I think maybe if we were in a 2-year standard rotation still, This might make the cut because the number of cards we have vying for the spot would be a lot less, but with it being a 3-year standard now, we have an embarrassment of cards to choose from, so I'm not 100% sure if this makes the cut in constructed, but still, a 1/2 first strike haste body swinging in on turn 1 is not bad, and the fact that you can sack it to get card advantage and ramp later on when the body isn't worth anything to you makes this super awesome and limited. Next up we have Discerning Peder, 2 mana, 1 red and 1 for a 2/2 human rogue. When he enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Normal bear that can rummage. We've seen this many times before. Yawn. Next card. Raven of Fell Omens. 1 black and 1 for a 1/2 flying bird. Whenever you commit a crime, each opponent loses 1 and you gain 1. But this ability triggers only once a turn. You know, this would kind of be okay if it wasn't limited to once a turn. It being limited to once a turn, nah. It's not even an outlaw. Black Snag Buzzard, 2/1 flying bird for 1 black and 2. When it enters the battlefield, it enters with a +1/+1 counter on it if a creature died this turn, which is kinda decent. This could be a pseudo win condition in limited. It's not going to be a top pick, but it can also plot for 1 black and 1, which means not only can you cast it for free later, you know, wait for a turn where you know something died so you can make sure you get the counter, but it's also going to cost you a little bit less mana. So I think if you're in a deck that wants to plot cards for other reasons, you could do a lot worse than including something like this, and I think the value of a card like this in that deck, at least in limited, goes way up. Next up we have Slickshot Vault Buster, 1 blue and 2 for a 1/4 human rogue with vigilance. It gets +2/+0 as long as you've committed a crime this turn. So it could be swinging as a 3/4 every turn if you're consistently committing crimes. So if you're building into an archetype that's committing crimes a ton, this guy's actually pretty decent as a 3-drop, right? If you consider it just a 3-drop, 3/4 vigilance, it's pretty nice. It's still not going to make the cut as like a top pick or anything like that. It's still going to be picked in the lower half of the pack, but it's a common, so that's kind of expected. But it might make the cut in a lot more decks than you'd think. Next up, we've got Vengeful Townsfolk, 1 white and 2 for a 3/3 human citizen. Whenever 1 or more other creatures you control die, you put a +1/+1 counter on Vengeful Townsfolk. What's cool about this guy is he's not limited to once a turn triggering. Granted, if everything dies at the same time, you only get 1 counter, but if everything is dying, you know, on its own at different points, if you have something that can sacrifice creatures 1 at a time, or, you know, you're trading 1 guy in combat, and then, you know, maybe sacrificing a creature later, you can get multiple counters, which is kind of cool, but this needs just the right deck to make it good. Otherwise, if it doesn't have just the right support, it could just be middling. So it really depends on what's in the rest of the set. Next up we have Steer Clear, 1 white for an instant. It deals 2 damage to an attacking or blocking creature. It deals 4 damage instead if you control the mount as you cast it. So what's cool about that ability is even if they kill your mount in response to you playing this spell, it doesn't matter, right? You still get the 4 damage because it was there when you cast it. So your opponent can't really blow out your ability to get the 4 damage if you're in like a mount tribal deck or something like that. It does seem like we have a lot of mount support, so I'm super curious if there's enough to actually go mount tribal in limited. I have an idea about a mount tribal deck I'm going to be making in standard that I think is going to be deceptively good, way better than people realize, and it's going to fly under the radar. I think people think that mount is sort of too cute and kind of janky and not to be taken seriously. Like, some of the cards are okay, but I mean mount as an actual tribe. But I think we're gonna prove them wrong because I have some cool ideas. But we're gonna move on here. Ariette's Lullaby, 1 white and 1 for sorcery. Destroy a tapped creature and gain 2 life. It's pretty good. The fact that it's a sorcery is a bummer. That means you have to let something that you want to hit with this hit you in combat first, or chump block it or whatever, before you get to kill it. But it's nice that you gain 2 life, so you gain some of the life back from the damage it dealt to you when it attacked, probably. And that kind of offsets it a little bit, which is really nice. So I actually think this is a really nice little piece of removal here. It's not going to be premier removal, but if you need to dig and find more removal for your deck, you know, a little bit later in the draft, you could do a lot worse than picking up one of these. Next up, we have Jin of Fools Fall, 1 blue and 4 for a 4/3 flying Jin, and it plots for 1 blue and 3. I kind of love this. As a common, this is surprisingly powerful and cheap for a flyer that can finish games relatively quickly. A 4/3 flyer is nothing to scoff at, and the fact that even if you can't get to your 5th land drop, you can just play it and have it delayed a turn and you know, with plot, and still get it out there is really, really nice. This is a pretty decent win condition for limited at common. So if you find yourself getting towards the end of the draft and you just don't feel like you have quite enough win conditions in your control deck or whatever, you do a lot worse than grabbing this guy. I think he's gonna see some play. Next up, we have Dance of the Tumbleweeds, 1 green and 1 for a sorcery. It has Spree, +1 mana, and you search your library for a basic land card or a desert card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. +3 mana, create a XX green elemental creature token, where X is the number of lands you control. So what's cool here is the land that you find can be a basic or a desert, which is nice, and it goes straight onto the battlefield, right, for 3 mana. Or just for 5 mana being able to make a huge body. But obviously when you use both of them together for a total of 6 mana, if you get this like a little bit later in the game when you have tons of mana as a top deck, being able to fetch a desert, especially if it's like one of the more uncommon deserts that is providing extra value beyond just mana, and then making an elemental that's now going to be a little bit bigger because of the desert you fetched, all of that is nice. But at the very least, you can use this to mana fix and ramp you early in the game, and then if you draw a second copy, you know, you can get the bigger elemental creatures. So there's a lot of versatility with this card. I really like it. If you're looking for mana fixing in a base green deck that's trying to run a lot of different colors, this is going to be an awesome pick. Next up, we have Erasable Wolverine, 1 red and 2 for a 3/2 Wolverine with plot, 1 red and 2. When it enters the battlefield, you exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card. So the reason you want to plot this is so that then on a later turn when you cast it for free, you get that ability to exile a top card and have to play it, but you have all of your mana available to play it. That's like the biggest downside to that kind of ability, is usually having to use mana to play a spell that does it, and then you have to have enough mana left over to cast whatever you happen to hit. So if you're in a deck that's got stuff that's a little more expensive, it's a lot harder to do that. This gets around that by letting you get that ability while you have all of your mana up, and then giving you a 3/2 body to boot. So I think it's a pretty solid card. If your deck wants to plot anyway, I think he's definitely going in. Next up, we have Bridled Big Horn, 1 white and 3 for a 3/4 sheep mount with vigilance, which is already halfway decent as a body. It saddles 2, and whenever Bridled Big Horn attacks while saddled, you create a 1/1 white sheep creature token. So for those of you who don't know, saddling is you have to tap creatures with power totaling whatever the saddle number is, and then it turns on this extra ability when you swing with it. So in this case, you're getting tokens when you swing. What's cool about this guy, and I think kind of overlooked, is the fact that once you've done this twice and made 2 tokens, the tokens themselves can then continue to saddle the Big Horn so that it can keep swinging each turn and making even more tokens. So it eventually becomes self-sufficient, which is really, really nice. And you combine that with the fact that it has vigilance, and so not only is it swinging to make a dude, but it's also still able to block after it does that. It's just a lot. It's a lot packed into one card, for a common at least. So I think this one's going to be one of the better commons to get picked relatively high for draft. Next up, we have Boneyard Desecrator, 1 black and 3 for a 3/4 zombie mercenary with menace. You can pay 1 black and 1, sack another creature, put a +1/+1 counter on the Desecrator. And if an outlaw was sacrificed this way, you make a treasure token. This is just a lot of value, especially when you take into account the fact that there's a lot of token generation in this set, specifically mercenary tokens, which count as outlaws. So being able to sacrifice these tokens that aren't as beneficial as full-on creatures, and, you know, get counters, get treasures to ramp into some big threat, It's super valuable, I think, depending on, you know, what kind of deck you're in. I think if you're going into Outlaw Tribal, and specifically the mercenary slant of Outlaw Tribal, I think this guy's going to be pretty decent inclusion. He does take a decent amount of mana to use his ability, and so you got to take that into account. But all in all, a decent little body there. And then we have Holy Cow. I know most of you guys have seen this card already, but we haven't spoiled it on the channel yet, so we're doing it now. It's a 2/2 Flash Flying Ox Angel for 1 white and 2, and when it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life and scry 1. It's just cool. It doesn't draw you a card when it enters, but it does scry you to give you a better chance of hitting that next card you need. Gains a little life to deal with aggro, gives you a flyer, and all at flash speed. I think this is a lot for a common, and I kinda love it, because holy cow. Alright, we're on to our uncommons. Our first uncommon of the day is another spoiler card that was given to 𝐶𝑒𝑟𝑟 Jr. Want to give another shout out to him, friend of the channel, awesome content creator. Check him out if you haven't already. But he got a second spoiler card given to him by Wizards of the Coast, and it's even better than the first one he got. If you're interested in what the first one is, you're going to have to check out our Day 2 spoiler video, link in the description. But this is Shoot the Sheriff. 1 black and 1 for an instant, destroy target non-outlaw creature. First of all, don't use this on Luna. If you understood that joke, congratulations, you're cool. If you didn't, we're moving on. Destroy target non-outlaw creature. So, this is one of those cards that's really weird because it's super good in older formats where there's less outlaw creatures. It's going to be really, really at its weakest in like limited in this set in particular because there's just so many outlaws. It's not even just a creature type. It is an entire batch of creature types, so it's just so much more prevalent, right? And I'm really curious how good it's going to be in Standard, because obviously Standard isn't going to have as many outlaws as Limited for this set is going to have, but it's going to have more outlaws than older sets for sure, because this set's going to be a big part of Standard. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to know just where this card stands. I think, if anything, it becomes a sideboard card in Constructed, and I really have no idea how usable it is in Limited at all. I'm scared. Hellspur Brute, 1 red and 4 for a 5/4 Minotaur Mercenary, with Trample. Has affinity for outlaws, so it costs 1 less for every outlaw you control, which is nuts. If this was just affinity for one specific creature type, it wouldn't be quite as busted, but because it's this batch of 5 creature types, and there's so many of them, even the token creation in this set makes mercenaries, which are outlaws. That means there's a really, really good chance you can get this down for super cheap, super easy, which has me excited. If you're going deep into Outlaw Tribal in Limited, this guy is going to be a very, very high pick. The potential for this to come down on like turn 3 for 3 mana is so high, or turn 4 for like 1 mana is just crazy. So definitely pick this high if you know you're going into Outlaw Tribal. In fact, it might even be a signpost card that you should go Outlaw Tribal, as long as you don't have something more bomby to pick over it. But very high pick for sure. Really good card. I would bet this is going to see play in Constructed, in Standard specifically, and I really think because of this card, there's some other cards too that make me think this way, but this card's kind of the tipping point of making me think that Outlaw Tribal could actually be a relevant competitive archetype in Standard, and that's kind of exciting. The idea of getting this down super early as a 5/4 trampler for 1 mana just gets me all hot and bothered. Next up, we have Nimble Brigand, 1 blue and 2 for a 1/3 human rogue. Can't be blocked if you've committed a crime, and then when it deals damage to a player, combat damage specifically, you get to draw a card. So if you have enough stuff in the deck that's committing crimes, if you're deep into committing crimes, you can just keep turning on the ability to get through unblocked, and then keep drawing cards because of that, which will draw you into more cards that let you commit crimes so that you can keep doing it, which is really nice. It'd be nice if we could buff up his power, but even just drawing the cards is going to be strong enough, so that's probably a little too much to ask for. Next up, we've got Bandits Hall. 3 mana for an artifact. Whenever you commit a crime, you put a loot counter on Bandits Hall. This ability triggers only once each turn, and then you can tap it for a mana of any color. You can also pay 2 mana, tap it, remove 2 loot counters to draw a card. I think this is really good fixing. Like, a mana rock for 3 that taps for a mana of any color is usually among the better of the mana rocks we'd expect. Sometimes we get 3 mana rocks that don't give us a mana of any color, but it's specific colors. Sometimes we're lucky enough that they give us a mana of any color. And in that case, this is one of those cases. But the fact that every time we commit a crime, we put a loot counter on it, you could play this and then immediately tap it for mana to play like a cut down, kill their guy, and then have 1 loot counter on it already. And then all you have to do is commit 1 more crime, and you turn on the ability to draw a card with this, which is really nice. So I don't think it's quite good enough to use in Constructed probably, but in Limited, I think this is a fine card that's going to be a nice way of fixing, ramping, and giving you some card advantage later in the game, and you kind of want all those things, so looks pretty good to me. Intrepid Stable Master. 1 green and 1 for a 2/2 human scout with reach. You can tap it for a green mana. You can also tap it for 2 mana of any color if you spend that mana only to cast a mount or vehicle spell. So if the Mount Tribal is an archetype within Limited, this is going to be a very, very high pick card for that archetype, if you know for sure you're in it. But even outside of that, just a 2/2 reach for 2 that can tap for mana is still really good. If you happen to just incidentally have a couple mounts or vehicles in your deck, and there's a chance you can get even more out of this, it's just a slam dunk, even without going Mount Tribal. So I think this is a relatively high pick, not like a first pick or anything like that, but a relatively high pick for Limited. And if Mount Tribal is a real thing in Standard, and I'm gonna make it a real thing, it's probably gonna be Naya. I think this card's gonna be bananas. So yeah, that's a thing. Beast Bond Outcaster. 3/3 human druid for 1 green and 2. When he enters, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card, and you can plot him for 1 green and 1. So nice 3/3 body, come down right away if you absolutely need to. If you happen to have a big enough body on the board already, you draw a card. But if you don't, and you don't absolutely need the board presence, you can save yourself a little bit of mana by plotting him and playing him later, and then you can wait to play it until after you have something that is power 4 or greater so that you can draw that card. So I think this is pretty good. Again, it's another one of those plot cards where, like, if you have other reasons for wanting to go plot, this guy's gonna get even better. So something to keep in mind. Next up is Rustler Rampage. 1 white for an instant. It has Spree, so you can pay 1 extra mana to untap all creatures target player controls, or you can pay 1 extra mana to give target creature double strike until end of turn, or you can pay a total of 2 extra mana to do both of those, which at instant speed is kind of gnarly. If your opponent swings in and you spend 3 mana and just like untap your whole board and block and blow them out, but like also give something double strike so that you kill something you might otherwise not have, is nuts. But then the fact that it can alternatively be used when you're on the attack to give your biggest dude double strike, and then still untap your dudes so that they're ready to block eventually when it's your opponent's turn, is kind of wild. Gets even better with stuff like tap abilities on creatures, because you can use those abilities like the mercenaries being able to tap to give something +1/+0, and then just untap them, right? So a lot of versatility here. Use it on your main phase, untap all your mercenaries, use them all to buff your guys again. You still gave something double strike. You're not using it as a combat trick in that scenario to blow out your opponent, but you are getting insane bang for your buck as far as buffing up all of your power, getting double strike on a dude. It's very versatile, and I kind of love it. Next up, we have Slick Sequence. I am super excited to brew with this card. 1 red, 1 blue for an instant. When you play it, you deal 2 damage to any target, and if you've cast another spell this turn, you draw a card. So it's basically like a shock, with an extra blue mana tacked on to draw a card, as long as you're playing it correctly. If you're playing it in a deck with very, very cheap spells, this is going to be an easy way to like use removal or to help finish off an opponent, get their life total low enough that you can finish them off while also drawing more gas, which is really nice. If you're in a deck that cares about like prowess and stuff like that, this is going to be awesome. You don't have to worry as much about running out of spells to cast to trigger the prowess, because this is going to draw you into another one, as long as you also have really cheap spells to go alongside it. So I just think this card is awesome. I already have a sort of mono red, but sort of is it burn deck that I've been messing around with. I have a couple deck techs on the channel that are iterations of that. The first one was called Hot Tub Time Machine, and I love that deck, and I think this slots perfectly into that. It's just awesome. Next up, we have Shackle Slinger. 1 blue and 2 for a 3/2 human soldier. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, choose target creature an opponent controls. If it's tapped, you put a stun counter on it. Otherwise, you tap it. What's awesome is this works every time you cast your second spell on every turn. So if you can plot some stuff, right? Cast 2 free spells that you plotted on your turn, you can use the ability on your turn to put a stun counter on something, and then say go with all of your mana held up, and then if you can cast 2 instants on your opponent's turn, you can do it again on your opponent's turn, and tap down their dude or whatever, and make it so that they can't swing in and really stall out the game. So that's not going to happen too often, right? That takes a lot of setup, but the fact that there's potential for things like that with this card is really, really cool. So if you're in a deck that's using plot, that's maybe using a lot of instant speed and flash, maybe even both of those things, and there's potential to turn this on a lot more often, you might want to consider grabbing a copy of this card for your limited deck. Next up, we have Rise of the Varmints. 1 green and 3 for a sorcery. I say next up a lot, don't I? I should probably try to think of other words to say. This one is Rise of the Varmints. 1 green and 3 for a sorcery. Create X 2/1 green varmint creature tokens, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. You can also plot it for 1 green and 2. So this is super good for like a self-mill creature deck if you're trying to play Lurgoyfs, or maybe you're trying to do Insidious Roots, and you're filling up your graveyard with more creatures than you're able to exile every turn. This could be kind of wild and make a whole bunch of creature tokens, and then because they're tokens, they can tap for mana because of the Insidious Roots. So there's potential for that here. I'm not 100% sure if it's quite good enough to make the cut, but it's definitely worth considering and trying. The fact that you can plot this and just play it for free also makes it kind of wild, right? Because you can just wait until you have a whole bunch of creature cards in your graveyard on a later turn and then play it. And maybe you have a way to give everything haste that same turn, and you can use your mana to do that since you get to play this card for free because it was plotted. I don't know, just spitballing here, but it seems like there's a lot of potential. I think at the very least in Limited, this is always going to be good, right? Mid-game, you're always going to have at least a handful of creatures in your yard if you've been trading back and forth. So even without self-mill, I think this is pretty decent in Limited. It gets even better if you're in that kind of an archetype. So keep it in mind. We've got Magebane Lizard here, a 1/4 lizard for 1 red and 1, which is already a decent body. Whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, it deals damage to that player equal to the number of non-creature spells they've cast this turn. This is literally anti-storm. If your opponent tries to storm off, this exponentially increases the damage. Also, it's going to be really good in Limited, or even in Standard potentially as a sideboard card, against plot decks in particular, because the first spell they cast for free, you ping them for 1. And then when they try to cast another spell for free the same turn, then you ping them for 2. And then the third spell pings them for 3. And it just gets exponentially crazy. Like, they can't go off with plot all on the same turn without this thing just demolishing them. And I sort of love that. And the fact that it's not a bad body anyway makes it so it's really easy to include without having to just be a sideboard card in your Limited deck, which is really nice. So I think this guy's going to be a little bit better than people realize, because I don't think people realize just how crazy plot's going to be and how prevalent it's going to be. Get ready, because it's going to be wild. It's going to be wild. Here we have Take for a Ride. 1 red and 2 for a sorcery. Take for a Ride as flash as long as you've committed a crime this turn. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap it. It gains haste until end of turn. Being able to play this for flash with flash is kind of cool, right? It means that you can potentially use this as a way to block their creature with their own creature and blow them out, which is way better than having to use it on your turn and just swing with it, right? So it's not as aggressive as other threaten spells, threaten effects that we've got in the past, because the best way to use it is not on the attack. But it could be used in a completely different way that makes this card way better and used in completely different contexts. Like, as long as you have enough stuff in your deck that is committing crimes, this is kind of just an insane, like, I'm going to kill your 2 best dudes by stealing one and forcing it to block the other before you even realize that's about to happen, right? So, pretty awesome. You are going to need instant speed ways to commit crimes to pull that off, but it's definitely possible. So if we can just brew in that direction, this is going to be a slam dunk and probably one of the best threatens we've had for limited in quite a while, assuming we have enough instant speed commit a crime support. If we do, and if those cards are good enough to use on their own without just having to kind of jump through hoops and use them specifically for this, and this can just be extra value alongside them, then this is going to be great. Here we have Requisition Raid, 1 white for a sorcery with Spree, so you can pay 1 extra mana to destroy an artifact, 1 extra mana to destroy target enchantment, or 1 extra mana put a +1/+1 counter on each creature target player controls. This is crazy. This card is crazy. So you're telling me this can be a 2 mana, it's 2 mana disenchant at its base, right? You can spend 2 mana to destroy an artifact or an enchantment. With just an extra mode, instead of destroying an artifact or an enchantment, you could also just, you know, if you're ahead on board and don't have anything to kill, I don't know, just put a bunch of counters on all your guys. So that already makes it good. The fact that you can just put an extra mana into turning on another one of these abilities at any time, you could potentially pay 4 mana and just use this 1 card, destroy their best artifact, destroy their best enchantment, and buff your entire team. Like, that's crazy. Or any combination. This is probably standard playable, to be completely honest. Granted, it is at sorcery speed, but the versatility and the sheer advantage, depending on if the situation lines up correctly for you, just more than makes up for it, in my opinion. So this could be standard worthy, to be honest. This might see play in Boros combo, because it can just make your whole board huge enough to kill your opponent, double the power on your board, at a point in the game where that might matter and make the difference between winning or not just that very turn. So being able to get this, you know, residual sort of extra card advantage in the deck by, like, having the chance to kill an artifact or enchantment or both main deck on a card that's not wasted if you can't do those things could be wild. For limited, absolutely slam dunk. Yes, play this damn card. The only time it's not that great is if you are running a very creature light deck and you're not able to take advantage of the other mode, because then if your opponent happens to not have any good artifacts or enchantments, this is kind of dead. But I don't think that's going to happen very often, so play the card, damn it. Brimstone Roundup, 1 red and 1 for an enchantment. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a 1/1 red mercenary creature token that can tap to give a creature +1/+0 at sorcery speed. It also plots for 1 red and 2, which means this can come out for free right before you play another spell, which is important because it means that at the very least you can make sure you can double spell at least once. Even if everything in your hand is so expensive that you can only cast 1 thing a turn, you can make sure you plot this so that you can make sure you get 2 spells when you cast it and at least get that 1 mercenary token off of it. And then on subsequent turns, you can hopefully get to enough land to then finally start double spelling, right? And still get mercenaries off this. So I think it's a little decent. It's a little decent. I think it's decent, but it's a little bit expensive and takes a little bit of setup to potentially not get enough payoff. So I'm worried about that. It could be really good if there's enough value in these mercenary tokens, and if you're able to take advantage of the plot well enough, if you're able to consistently make sure you cast 2 spells, if you have other things in your deck that are going to give you payoffs for casting 2 spells, you know, then you increase the amount of value that you're getting because you're already going that way anyway, so you don't have to do it just for this payoff, you know. So there's a lot of kind of stipulations to make this card good enough, but the potential is there. Here we have Scalestorm Summoner, 1 red and 2 for a 3/3 human warlock. Whenever Scalestorm Summoner attacks, you get to create a 3/1 red dinosaur creature token if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. I kind of love this because it comes down on 3, and then chances are on turn 4, before you go to combat, when it can finally swing, you probably can play a 4-drop that has power 4 or more. You can probably brew specifically into that archetype in Limited to make sure you're consistently able to do that. And if that's the case, getting a 3/1 dinosaur is kind of bananas. Like, even if you only make the dinosaur once and then they trade with this guy in combat, you're still getting a ton of value. You're getting a 3/3 and a 3/1 for just your 3 mana. So obviously, it's dependent upon how consistently you can get this to trigger the first time it attacks on turn 4. You're going to need that consistency. But if you can consistently do that, if you do have enough cards that are going to turn this on, then this card's just going to be really, really good. Treasure Dredger, 1 black and 1. Say that 3 times fast. Treasure Dredger, Treasure Dredger, Treasure. I don't want to. 2/2. Human Rogue. Pay 1, tap it to pay 1 life, create a treasure. Seems fine to me. I think the main reason you'd want to run this, there's a couple things here. First of all, the fact that it's a rogue means it's a nice 22nd or 23rd card in your Outlaws deck if you just need another Outlaw to take advantage of some tribal stuff. You know, if that's going to make this card a little bit better than a non-Outlaw creature otherwise would have been, it could see play that way. The main reason I think you'd want to run this is if you are in a 3-color deck that's not using green. Having a way outside of green in a base black deck where you can create fixing to possibly give you mana for your other colors could be super important if those sorts of archetypes are important enough and if they exist. So keep that in mind. It's possible you could do like a Grixis build or something like that, or you know, an Esper build or something in Limited and still get your fixing that you need through something like this. So I don't think it's a high pick, but specific decks might need access to this ability in a big way. So if that's the case, like if you first pick a 𝑚𝑼𝐼𝐻𝑝, you might need to consider grabbing a Treasure Dredger or 2 just to even out the consistency of your deck. Next up we have Red Rock Sentinel. 3 mana for a 2/4 golem with defender, halfway decent body. Can pay 2, tap it, sack a land, draw a card, and create a treasure token. This is awesome. Like, it allows you to turn extra lands in Limited in the late game just into card advantage. And not only that, but you still get a little bit of mana value back in the form of a treasure token. So even though it is just a one-shot piece of mana, it is something, right? It does get basically one more. It's almost like you get to use that land for mana one more time, even after it's gone, in a way. Except you can get mana of any color since it's a treasure, so it's even a little bit better than that. You can even use the treasure token right away so that it effectively turns this ability into like a 1 mana ability instead of 2, because you're getting a mana back, and you can sack a land that you tapped already, which is nice. So there's a lot of little silver lining value to be had with this guy. I think he's actually a pretty decent pick if you're in the kind of deck that's going to try to grind out the game and make it to the late game where you can really take advantage of that card draw and you don't mind getting rid of your lands. If that's the case, he's going to see play. Here we have Canyon Crab, 1 blue and 1 for a 0/5 crab. You can pay 1 blue and 1 to give it +2/-2 until end of turn. You can activate that ability as many times as you want to, so if you have 4 mana, you could turn this into a 4/1, which is kind of cool. At the beginning of your end step, if you haven't cast a spell from your hand this turn, you get to draw a card and discard a card, which is a nice little bit of extra value. Obviously, it synergizes with plot decently well, because you can plot something and set yourself up to make sure you get to cast stuff for free that's not from your hand. So the turn that you plot the stuff, you didn't cast anything, you get the ability, and then the turn that you cast the stuff that you plotted, it's not being cast from your hand, so you also get the ability. There's a lot of creatures in this set that have this ability where something triggers if you didn't cast a spell from your hand this turn, and those cards go really, really well with plot. So I think if you can get some of these cards with this ability down early on curve, and then sort of transition into playing the game a different way, where you're not slamming stuff like this down, and instead you're plotting everything for the rest of the game, so that you can get a lot of value off cards like this. This card alone isn't good enough to jump through that hoop, but there's definitely some other creatures that are, and if you're already jumping through those hoops in a deck like that, also including the Canyon Crab here to get a little bit of extra value since you're doing it anyway, would probably be a good idea. Next up, we have Neutralize the Guards. This is 1 black and 2 for an instant. Creatures target opponent controls get -1/-1 until end of turn, and you surveil 2. I like that this is one-sided and at instant speed. It means you can set up some interesting combat scenarios where you potentially blow out your opponent, right? You can kill all of their mercenary tokens. There's just a lot of uses for this that I think are easily overlooked at first. Instant speed is nuts, and the fact that it also digs you 2 cards deeper for your bomb in limited is really important as well. So I think this is a really good card for limited. I don't quite know if it's main deckable, but at the very least, this sucker's coming in from the sideboard when you're up against mercenaries, that's for sure. Here we have Luxurious Locomotive, a 5-mana artifact vehicle. It's a 6/5. When it attacks, you create a treasure token for each creature that crewed it this turn. You can crew it for just 1, but you can only activate that ability once each turn. So basically, you have to commit to all of the creatures that you're going to have crew it all at once, because you can only activate that crew ability once a turn, but activating the crew once lets you choose any number of creatures. So even though you only are required a creature with 1 power or more to crew this and make it a creature, you can tap a whole bunch of extra dudes if you want to. Normally, that wouldn't provide any value and there's no reason to do that. But because when this swings, you get a treasure token for each creature that crewed it, there's a reason to do that here. So if you could just go wide with a whole bunch of token creatures and tap them all while crewing it, you could swing and make a whole bunch of treasures. You can basically make as many treasures in a turn for 0 mana as creatures you have on the board. And when you think about it like that, I wonder if this is good enough in standard, in constructed, for a token deck. Regardless of the fact that if it cares about treasures for other reasons or not, just being able to be in a token deck, if you've already got like 10 tokens out, you just crew them all and swing and make 10 treasure, so you can just vomit out insanely powerful cards from your hand. That seems like it could be a thing. I don't know. We're going to have to brew it. We're going to have to test it. We'll see. But I think it's a sweet idea. Limited, slam dunk. It's colorless. It goes into anything. It crews for just 1. Like, you got to play the card. You just got to play the card. Sheriff of Safe Passage. 1 white and 2 for a 0/0 human knight. When it enters the battlefield, it enters with a +1/+1 counter on it, plus an additional +1/+1 counter on it for each other creature you control. It can also plot for 1 white and 1. So if you play this and it's the only creature, it's coming down as a 1/1, which sucks. But if you play a 1-drop on turn 1, a 2-drop on turn 2, this can come down as a 3/3 on 3, which is decently on rate. It's not awful. If that's your floor, if that's where you're consistently aiming for with the type of deck that you built in Limited, that's not bad. And the fact that you have this plan B panic button of, oh crap, I don't have that many creatures down, I can't cast this thing, you just plot it. And when you do, it costs you 1 less mana, and then it just sits there in exile, and you wait until a later turn when you finally have a huge board, and then it comes in with a ton of counters on it. Maybe you can use this with all will be one, and just do a whole bunch of damage at once in a deck that goes wide, it's probably not worth the hoops to jump through to do that, but it is a thing you could do. It is a thing you could do. Or even in just like a token deck. Oh, you know what I just realized? I think this is probably really good in Boros Convoke, right? Because if you're like playing the 1-drop that makes an artifact on turn 1, and then you're blowing up your artifact to make 3 1/1s on turn 2, and playing another 1-drop, then on turn 3 you've got, what, 5 creatures? And this comes down and has a 6/6. That just seems good. So, that's scary. That's probably a thing. We're going to move on because I don't want to think about that anymore. This town ain't big enough. Ain't big enough for that deck, that's for sure. 1 blue and 4 for an instant. It costs 3 less to cast if it targets a permanent you control. So it'll cost only 2. You return up to 2 target non-land permanents to their owner's hand. So if you bounce one of your things and one of their things, this just costs 2 mana. Or you can bounce 2 of your things. This is deceptively good. Obviously it's going to be good because we've seen a lot of flicker support in this deck, so there's going to be a lot of ETBs that you can re-trigger by returning your own stuff to your hand alongside your flicker effects. It's another way to, you know, get that flicker value without actually using flicker cards, just bouncing your stuff back to your hand and replaying it. But you can use this in combat and do some pretty wild things where, like, your opponent swings in and you block their biggest thing with one of your dudes that has an ETB ability, and then you play this, and not only did you chump block the thing but not lose your creature because you bring it back to your hand, you also bounce their big problematic thing that you didn't block back to their hand, and then on your turn you can replay the thing that you bounced so that you get the ETB value, and all of that only costs you 2 mana. So there's some crazy stuff you can do with this card if you line it up correctly. I think this card is awesome. I think this is going to be a really high pick in Limited. Here we have Demonic Ruckus. 1 red and 1 for an enchantment aura. Enchants a creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has Menace and Trample. Decent for 2 mana. Problem is, if they kill your dude, you lose the aura too, and it's card disadvantage. But when Demonic Ruckus is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you get to draw a card. So it isn't. And that makes this card great. That makes this card really great, right? It replaces itself if it goes away, which is kind of what you need to make an aura playable. It also plots for 1 red mana, which means if you don't have a creature yet, you can just, if you have an extra mana left over that you can't use on a certain turn, just put this into exile, and then later on, you don't have to worry about, like, fitting in the mana to play the thing. Like, you're still spending all of your mana, like, on your bigger creatures or whatever, and then just playing this for free on your best creature and turning it into an absolute bomb. That sounds wonderful. Next up, we have Baron Bertram Greywater. 1 black, 1 white, and 2 for a 3/4 legendary Vampire Noble. Vampires, let's go. If you haven't seen my vampire deck, Daywalker, Dayblazer, check them out. Deck techs are up on the channel. They are insane. Probably the best aggro deck in the format. At least toe and toe with Boros Convoke for sure. Underappreciated. This is legendary. Whenever 1 or more tokens enter the battlefield under your control, you create a 1/1 black vampire rogue creature token with lifelink. This ability triggers only once each turn though, which is kind of a bummer. You can also pay 1 black and 1, sack another creature or artifact, draw a card. So I think this card's a little too slow for constructed, which is kind of a bummer, since I run vampires on the ranked ladder. But it's still a pretty cool card. I think it'll be pretty decent in Limited. You need tokens to enable it. The reason it's limited to once a turn is so that the tokens it makes aren't enabling itself, which would kind of be busted, right? But the fact that every time you make a token, you're making double tokens at least the first time each turn, and then you can use all your tokens to draw cards by sacking to him. He's like a sack outlet. All of that's pretty valuable and Limited. So if you're in the right deck, you know, where you're putting out a bunch of tokens, probably mercenary tokens, you can exponentially increase the value of that with this dude by getting even more tokens and being able to sack whatever you need to. add instant speed after you chump block or whatever. Just draw cards, which is nice. Here we have Rambling Possum, 1 green and 2 for a 3/3 Possum mount. It attacks while saddled. It gets +1/+2 until end of turn. And then you may return any number of creatures that saddled it to their owner's hand. It saddles for just 1. This is pretty decent. If you're in that Flicker ETB deck that wants to return stuff to your hand anyway, then you're just swinging with a 4/5 and getting the ability to return the thing you want to without having to pay any extra mana, which is pretty nuts, right? So it goes in a very specific deck. It wants to do a very specific thing, but within that deck, it does the damn thing pretty well. And also attacking with a 4/5 that only costs you 3 mana is pretty darn good by itself. So a valuable little card here in just the right deck. If you are in that deck, it's going to be a much higher pick than it otherwise would be. Next up, we have Wrangler of the Damned. 1 blue, 1 white, and 3 for a 1/4 human soldier with flash. And at the beginning of your end step, if you haven't cast a spell from your hand this turn, you get to make a 2/2 flyer. This is really good in Limited. You do have to prepare for it, right? This gets better if you're playing a lot of flash cards. It gets better if you're playing a lot of plot cards. It gets even better if you're able to play a combination of both of those in the same deck. But the important thing to note here is even if you're just get to the point in your Limited game where you're out of gas, you got no cards left in your hand and you've got nothing to do, you top deck a land and you're like cursing Richard Garfield, why did I flood so much this game? At the very least, you didn't play anything, you make a 2/2 flyer. And you can do that every single turn. And then on turns where you're not actually casting spells from your hand because you're plotting things or playing things that you already plotted, or you're waiting until your opponent's turn and casting them with flash or whatever, you're able to also get that kind of value. This can very easily give you a bunch of 2/2 flyers over the course of 2, 3, 4 turns. And in that way, it's kind of a nice engine, as long as you have just the right deck to support it. But like I said, it's nice that even if your deck's not doing the thing you want it to do to enable that, it's a nice catch-all of like, oh no, I'm out of gas. It gives you a little bit of gas. Next up, we have Lava Spur Boots, one of the better uncommons in the set, in my opinion. Just 1 mana for an equipment. It equips for just 1 mana. It gives the equipped creature +1/+0, ward 1, and most importantly, haste. The fact that this comes out so cheaply as just a 1 mana artifact, and then every single creature that you play every turn, all you have to do is just pay 1 extra mana and it gets haste. But you also get the +1 power here, so it's like, doesn't feel like you only wasted that mana on giving your thing haste. You get a little power boost as well, and a little bit of protection, so that if your opponent's tapped out, like, they can't target it. Like, it just kind of does everything. Like, haste is the reason you want to play this, and that's what's gonna make this card super good. But the other stuff is such good gravy. I just kind of love this card. It's definitely going to be a high pick in Limited, and I think it's going to actually see a fair amount of play in Constructed. We'll see. We'll see. Next up, we have Visage Bandit. I used to pronounce it Visage Bandit, and then chat corrected me on the pronunciation. Damn you, chat. But Visage Bandit is my pick for the best uncommon spoiled today. I think this card is nuts. 2/2 for 1 blue and 3. When it enters the battlefield, it enters as a copy of a creature you control, except it's a shapeshifter rogue in addition to its other types. So even as its base, it's a 4 mana clone, right? That can just copy anything in play, but also still be an outlaw. So you can use it in Outlaw Tribal, make copies of, you know, gross creatures, except an outlaw copy, so they can get your outlaw payoffs, which is pretty cool. It is a little bit expensive, but we can make up for that with plot. It plots for 1 blue and 2. So if you don't want to cast it yet, right? Say it's turn 3, and you know you have a crazy card coming on turn 5, like a Terror of the Peaks or something that you're going to cast. You just plot this on turn 3. Your opponent's like, oh, tempo loss, sweet, my gain. Little do they know, you're just gonna play something like normal on turn 4, and then on turn 5 play your Terror of the Peaks, and then immediately play this for 0 mana and make a copy of your Terror of the Peaks. And that is gross. You can do that in Limited, which is gross. If you get a Terror of the Peaks in Limited, you absolutely have to grab this guy every time you see him, because that's disgusting. I'm making that deck for Standard, and I just think this guy is nuts. But the fact that you could just do that with anything, doesn't have to be Terror of the Peaks, right? You can set yourself up to, you know, if you know you've got an awesome threat coming down the line, you can just set yourself up to make sure you have 2. A little bit of tempo loss, but in Limited, you can probably suffer it if you know that insane value is about to come, you know, a couple turns later. So I just think this card is bananas. I'm going to pick it high. I'm going to brew with it in Standard. It's going to be bananas. I'm excited. I'm excited. Let me know in the comments below if you're as excited as I am, because I'm excited. It's time for the rares. But before that, I need some coffee. Coffee break. Coffee break. Coffee. Nectar of the gods. It really is nectar of the gods. Where were we? Malcolm, the Eyes. 1 red, 1 blue for a 2/2 legendary Siren Pirate with flying and haste, and whenever you cast your second spell each turn, investigate. Now, this is one of those cards I was talking about earlier when I said if you have other reasons in the deck to cast a second spell each turn, you know, there's reasons to play some of those other lesser payoffs. This being one of them. This is deceptively good. You look at it, it looks boring. It doesn't look quite good enough, right? But a 2/2 flying haster for 2 is already pretty decent of itself. So the fact that just as an extra thing, as gravy, you get to make a clue token every time you cast your second spell each turn. If you're in the right deck, plotting's gonna help you cast your second spell easier, right? If you're just in the Spell Slinger deck that has cheap spells to begin with, like, there's a lot of ways now, especially with this set with plot, of setting yourself up to double spell a lot easier than it used to be. So a card like this that's coming out and being super aggressive and then just giving you extra value in later turns, like whenever you're you know, casting a second spell, can even come out on turn 2 or on turn 3 rather, and then play a 1-drop, and you immediately make a clue token off the 1-drop while swinging in with this guy in the air. So I don't think he's like amazing or broken or anything like that, don't get me wrong, but I think he's a little bit better than people give him credit for, just because of how aggressive he is, along with having just incidental card advantage that's going to trigger sometimes at worst and every turn at best. Next up we have Campbell. Is he soup? I don't know. Let me know in the comments below how I'm supposed to pronounce this. I don't even know. We're gonna say Campbell because it's funny. Profiteering Mayor. Sounds like profiteering. 2/4 legendary human advisor. 1 black, 1 white, and 1. Whenever 1 or more tokens enter the battlefield under your opponent's control, for each of them you create a tapped token that's a copy of it. This ability triggers only once each turn. And then whenever 1 or more tokens enter the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this is kind of like a reverse Aristocrats, like reverse Blood Artist, where it's not pinging when something dies, instead it's pinging when something enters the battlefield, and then on top of that, it's giving you even more of the tokens that are going to enable it to ping if your opponent happens to make tokens. So it's like, you want to use it in a token deck, but you also want to use it as an anti-token strategy. This might be a good answer to Boros Convoke. The fact that it pads out your life total while lowering theirs, and it triggers off of the first time they make tokens each turn, could actually matter. What's interesting too is you don't just need creature tokens for this to work. You could literally just go wide with blood tokens or treasure tokens or map tokens or whatever you want, and they're all going to trigger this drain ability, which is kind of gnarly because I think there are easier ways to make mass amounts of other tokens that aren't creatures, more so than creature tokens. Maybe I'm wrong about that. There's a couple cards in my head I don't remember the name of, but I think there's some cool stuff you could do with this. It's a little expensive for what it does. I'm not 100% sure this will make the cut in Standard, but it's definitely interesting enough that I hope it does, if that makes any sense. Moving on, we have 𝐿𝒆𝒄 Posse Boss. 2 red and 2 for a 2/4 Lizard Rogue. Other outlaws you control have haste. And also, when he enters, you get to make 2/1/1 red mercenary creature tokens, and each of those has the ability to tap and give something +1/+0 at sorcery speed. So, at the very least, you have a 4 mana 2/4 and 2/1/1, so a total of 4/6 in power across 3 bodies for 4 mana, and you give everything in your deck haste, including the 2/1/1s you made, that can immediately tap and give other creatures +1/+0 that are attacking that turn, and then use their abilities on subsequent turns to give the other outlaws you're playing that now have haste and can swing immediately extra power when they attack. This just seems like it does a lot. Like, on the surface, it doesn't seem like it's that much, but when you really think about it, this just does a lot. Like, you're only using it in Outlaw Tribal, right? So everything having haste, with the exception of this guy himself, is kind of really good in and of itself. So the fact that the bodies that you're getting off of this is way above rate, and they have abilities, just makes this card insane, in my opinion. It has to be used in just the right deck, but if you're in that deck, holy crap. I think the Outlaw Tribal deck is shaping up to be something special. Moving on, here we have Lila, Undefeated Slickshot. 1 red, 1 blue, and 1 for a 3/3 legendary human rogue, so it is an outlaw. It has prowess, so it's going to get buffed up whenever you play non-creature spells, including when you play things that you plotted for free, which is really nice. And whenever you cast a multicolored instant or sorcery spell from your hand, so not plot, keep that in mind, you exile that spell instead of putting it into your graveyard as it resolves. And if you do, it becomes plotted. So what's cool about that is you're basically plotting everything for free while still casting it as normal, which is the best of both worlds. So this card's kind of insane. I mean, it has to be in just the right deck. Is it too slow? Maybe. Is it just going to die to removal before you get to do the thing? Probably. But if this sticks around and you can just fire off a bunch of instants and sorceries, and then just play them again for free next turn, and then do the same thing again next turn where you're playing a bunch of instants and sorceries and putting them aside to play for free the turn after that, like, not only are you basically doubling the amount of prowess triggers you're getting, because you're getting all the spells you're playing from hand, and then all the ones you're playing for free from plot that got cast last turn, you're doubling all of your prowess, but you're also just getting way more spells cast in a turn. You're doubling the amount of spells you cast every single turn, as long as this guy sticks for like a couple turns. Or I guess girl. Is it girl? Yeah, Lila's a girl's name. It's probably a girl. I don't want to assume, but we'll say she. I think this card could be great. Again, it's probably going to die to removal, but the Izzet Spellslinger deck just seems to be getting so many valuable creatures. It's getting to that point where, like, even if everything dies to removal, like, if you play all the really good creatures that go with all the spellslinging, like, one of them's got to stick, right? At some point, one of them's got to stick. So, I don't know. Maybe this will be gross. We'll see. Here we have Railway Brawler. 2 green and 3 for a 5/5 Rhino Warrior with Reach and Trample, which is already a pretty good body. But whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is its power. And then you can plot for 1 green and 3. The plot ability on this makes it awesome, because the one downside to this guy is you slam him on 5, they use removal on him, the removal costs less than 5, they get a tempo advantage, you get no brawler. And that always feels super bad, and that's like the #1 reason that 5-drops, good 5-drops, won't see play when they end up not seeing play, is because if they just die to removal, it's tempo disadvantage, you can't afford to take all of your turn 5 off and have nothing to show for it and let your opponent kill it and still cast another spell that turn, a 2-drop creature or whatever. That's just, it's no bueno. So the fact that you can plot this under the right circumstances so that it can come down for free, and then you can immediately use all of your mana that turn to play other creatures that are going to trigger its ability. So even if they do kill the damn thing, you can get potentially tons of value the turn that you play it, and it kind of doesn't matter. That makes this card really, really good. Again, I think Plot's just going to be way better than people realize. There's so much silver lining value to be had in it. Not only can you do stuff like this, but I pointed out in the last video that you can a lot of times plot a couple creatures into exile so that everything can come down on the same turn, on a turn where they don't have enough mana to kill everything, right? So instead of playing your 3-drop on 3 or 4-drop on 4, and them having a 3-drop removal, a piece of removal on 4, and they're dealing with each creature one at a time each turn because they have the mana to cast the spell. Drop 3 or 4 creatures all in the same turn, and they still have only targeted removal and not sweepers. Like, they can't cast it all. They don't have enough mana. Like, they have to let you keep something, and there's value in that. And I think people are underestimating just how crazy it can get if you plan well enough ahead. So it's going to be really cool to see if this card makes waves for sure. Here we have Geared, Mirror of the Wilds. This is another one of those cards that leaked early a few weeks ago, and we covered it in a leak video. But we're going to cover it again here now since it was formally spoiled at a time when we kind of have a better idea of what everything else in the set's doing. So 3/3 haste for 3 mana in the colors of Naya. It's a legendary human shaman, so it is not an outlaw. Non-token creatures you control have tap create a token that's a copy of target token you control that entered the battlefield this turn. So even just a 3/3 haster for 3 is kind of okay. And it's important to note here that he can use his own ability. It doesn't say other non-token creatures. So as soon as he comes down, since he has haste, you can immediately tap him to make a copy of a token. So for 3 mana, you get your dude and a copy of your best token, which if you're able to make relevant tokens, maybe a big creature token or something, that could be really powerful. But then just the fact that all your other non-token creatures have that ability as well could kind of get wild. If you've already got, you know, a few other creatures on the field when you play Geared, and you have just like the one XX elemental creature token on the field or something, Geared can tap to make a copy. All those other creatures that were already out can immediately tap to make a copy. All of a sudden, you're swimming in power and toughness. It could be crazy. You're going to need high value tokens to really get the most out of this card, while also balancing that between having actual creature cards that aren't tokens so that they can tap to make copies. And that is a delicate balance to try and weave, so keep that in mind. But if you can get the balance just right, this guy could be super powerful. Next card is 𝑇𝑒𝑟𝑟𝑎𝑛, Perfect Shot, aka Joaquin Phoenix. I will always call this card that because it's awesome. And Joaquin Phoenix is awesome. No joke. Pun intended. 2/3 legendary creature, human mercenary for just 2 mana in Boros. Whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to a creature equal to that creature's toughness exactly, you get to draw a card, which is kind of cool. But it's even better because you can pay X and tap her, and if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to a permanent or player this turn, it deals that much damage plus X instead. Oh my god, that's good. I just realized how good that is. I was thinking play End the Festivities, and one of their things gets to take however much extra damage you can dump mana into, right? But no. You could play End the Festivities, and if you have an extra 3 mana, you pay 3 and tap this, and it does the extra 3 damage to everything. All of their permanents and their head. That's so crazy. This card is so crazy. Oh my god, this is so much better than I thought it was. This is bananas. It's good with one-sided red sweepers, and oh, we just got a new End the Festivities. And I remember thinking it's not quite as good as End the Festivities, so it doesn't make the cut. But now if we can run 8 copies of End the Festivities with this... Alright, my brain is grinding, guys. We're going to build a deck. We're building a deck. We're going to do the damn thing. This card's bananas. The fact that you could target creatures with it and use it for removal. The fact that you could just target their head and use it as a win condition. The fact that it lets you draw cards under certain conditions, and you don't have to use the tap ability to draw the cards. You could shock a 2/2, draw a card, shock another 2/2, draw a card, then play End the Festivities, and you use your last mana if you have a total of 6 mana or whatever, or 4 mana, to just buff your damage by 1. Like, there's so much versatility here. Not only that, but another cool way you can use this, which is what I was planning on brewing originally, and maybe we're going to have to brew 2 decks, or some kind of a hybrid idea. But the original idea I was thinking of before I realized how gross that idea was a battle deck. Because it's still pretty decent in a battle deck where now it's really easy to flip your battles because you can just ping a battle for 1 and then do all the extra damage with tie. And then next turn ping a battle for 1 and do all the... You get to like very easily flip a battle every turn by using 𝑇𝑒𝑟𝑟𝑎𝑛 to get you there with the rest of the damage without having to worry about getting through with unblocked attackers or anything. So there's some potential there. There's a ton of potential within the festivities. There's potential just in Burn in general. Like, let's go, baby. Burn is back. We're doing it. I also love that she's Native American because I'm part Native American and it makes me happy. Selvala, Eager Trailblazer. 1 white, 1 green, and 2 for a 4/5 legendary elf scout with vigilance. This is another one of those cards that leaked a few weeks ago that we covered, but again, we're covering it again because it officially announced now and we're going to do the damn thing. Whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 1/1 red mercenary creature token that can tap to give something +1/+0 until end of turn as a sorcery. Which is insanely good because that is not limited to once a turn. Normally these abilities are limited. It seems like they're really starting to shift their gears and get back to having more abilities that aren't limited to once a turn, which thank goodness, because that was so annoying. Things being limited to once a turn is so annoying. I understand that sometimes it's necessary to not break it, but to be so excited about something and then read that last line of text and go, oh, it's just the biggest buzzkill, you know? So this can trigger as many times as however many creatures you cast, which is nuts, right? So if you're in a go wide deck, you could just make a whole bunch of tokens really quick. But not only that, you can tap it and choose a color and add a mana of that color for each different power among creatures you control. And since this gives you mercenaries that can tap to buff up powers, you can set yourself up to use all of the mercenaries you've made with Selvala to increase very specific creatures' powers so that you can stagger as many different power numbers as possible, and then add even more mana so that you can cast even more spells. All of that after swinging, because she also has vigilance. And that seems like a lot. I think in just the right deck, she's going to be bananas busted. It has to be just the right deck. Otherwise, she's just going to be okay, right? In limited even, she's not as much of a bomb. She's still going to be really good. All of your creatures giving you an extra dude, still going to be really good in limited. But I think if there's just the right deck for this, if you can build it just right, where you can really go off with creatures, but then also have something super bomby to play with all the extra mana you end up making, it could be crazy. It is a bummer that she's not an outlaw herself because she makes outlaws. So there's a little bit of a nombo there. You kind of want to play outlaw tribal to take advantage of all the mercenary tokens, but you kind of don't because she doesn't fit in very elegantly. But it is what it is. Next card that I am super excited about is Roxanne Starfall Savant. 4/3 legendary cat druid for 1 green, 1 red, and 3. Which doesn't seem very on rate, but wait, there's more. When she enters the battlefield or attacks, you get to create a tapped colorless artifact token named Meteorite. With whenever Meteorite enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target, and it can tap to add 1 mana of any color. This is awesome. For those of you who know what Meteorite is, it's been a staple uncommon that's reared its head in certain sets every now and then. It's a 5-drop colorless artifact that deals 2 damage to anything when it enters, and then taps for a mana of any color. So it's this exact same thing, but it costs 5. So the fact that you get a 4/3 body kind of for free with your Meteorite that can then go on to make an extra Meteorite every single turn for no mana just by attacking is crazy. But the card doesn't even stop there. Whenever you tap an artifact token for mana, you get to add 1 mana of any type that artifact token produce. So it doubles all of your mana production from your artifacts, whether it's the meteorites that she's making, or treasures that you already have down, or whatever the case may be. Man, I don't know what I'm brewing her with yet, but she seems awesome. I kinda love her. Maybe in Cat Tribal with Roaming Throne, naming Cat, so we get 2 meteorites every time she ETBs or swings. I don't know. We're gonna have to think about this. I'm sure there's ways to use her that are crazy, and I want to make them because I love ETBs. Specifically, I love creatures that when they ETB, they have removal attached to them, like Flametongue Kavoo style, like Chupacabra style. I love that stuff. Those who have watched me live over on Twitch know that I have a deck over there called Chupaduplicate that I love. It was kind of the first real deck that I ever put together on Arena, and it just hyper focuses on, you know, creatures with ETB abilities that kill stuff, and then things that can make copies of those creatures so that you can just keep doing it, and it's super fun. But anyway, I'm getting off topic and I'm rambling, and I apologize. Roxanne's kind of awesome. I want to find ways to bust her. Next up, we have Smuggler's Surprise, talking about busted. 1 green for an instant. Keep that in mind. It's an instant, guys. For an extra 2 mana, you can mill 4 cards and put up to 2 creatures and or land cards from among the mill cards into your hand, which is fine, but that's kind of like the extra mode. Think of that as the extra. That's not the primary thing. Put that mode out of your mind. For an extra 1 green and 4, you can put up to 2 creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. That's the bread and butter, guys. That's bananas. We'll get back to that in a minute. For an extra 1 mana, creatures you control with power 4 or greater gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Let's unpack this. So at 6 mana, for just 6 mana, at instant speed, you could put your 2 best creatures from your hand directly onto the battlefield without casting them, which means it gets around something like High Noon. And it doesn't matter how much they cost. You can put a 𝑇ℎ𝑒𝑟𝑟𝑎𝑛 onto the field, boom, at the same time for 6 mana, at instant speed, which means you can wait for your opponent to attack you, and then do it during combat, and then block with the 𝑇ℎ𝑒𝑟𝑟𝑎𝑛. So not only are you getting the triggers and the crazy creatures on the graveyard, or on the battlefield rather, to swing with next turn, but you're also blocking their best creatures, killing them, blowing them out, gaining 7 life from the 𝑇ℎ𝑒𝑟𝑟𝑎𝑛. This is insane. This is just, that alone at instant speed is nutty. But the fact that this can also just be a 2 mana thing that gives all your big creatures hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, so that it can save your board at instant speed, like just this alternate mode that's something completely different that is just also really, really good in a deck like this that already has enough power on the field to just win if you can keep it, is nutty. The fact that you can use both of those together if you have enough mana, if you top deck this late enough in the game, is also insane, right? That's just crazy. You could play this, I think you could play this during your opponent's end step, after it moves to end step, and then the hexproof and indestructible might last until your next turn, till the end of your next turn, since you already passed the start of your end step, or the start of their end step, sorry. Let me know in a comment below. I believe that's how it works. It's definitely how it worked for Fable of the Mirror Breaker, when you got a token that was a copy until end of turn. If you activate it during the end step, after the end step had already triggered, it would last until the end of your turn, which was awesome. I think this would work the same way too. So it being an instant is just bananas. But then not only that, but like, if you don't have anything in your hand to put into play, you can play the +2, pay the +2 if you have it, so that you get things into your hand to put into play for free with the extra 5, and that's crazy. And if you just top deck this way late in the game when you have all the mana in the world, you can just get all the value. So like, each of its modes are nuts, the ways in which you can combine the modes are nuts, and the fact that you can use it at instant speed is nuts. So that's just triple nuts. That's all the nuts. Like, if you're a squirrel, you're super stoked. Here we have Kellen Joins Up. 3 mana legendary enchantment in the colors of Bant. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile a non-land card with mana value 3 or less from your hand. If you do, it becomes plotted. And then whenever a legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So first of all, it grabs something from your hand and plots it, so it basically replaces itself, right? It's kind of free. You play a 3-drop this turn, being Kellen joins up, and then you get a 3-drop next turn for free. So you kind of were able to play this for free by just delaying the thing that you would have played instead that's a 3-drop in your hand. And then it just sits there and it buffs your whole team in Legendary Tribal. Everything just gets bigger every time you cast a legend. Imagine playing this with Joda. Joda lets you free cast legends every time you cast another legend, so you're just like doubling up on triggers. I mean, that might be win more because Joda's probably buffing up the team enough that you're winning as it is. But if they've got instant speed removal for your Joda, then like you still potentially have enough win condition potential here in the buffs that this is handing out that it might not matter. Man, I don't know exactly what this is best for, but I love the fact that it puts something that costs the same amount of it into exile to be played for free next turn. Like that just makes it really cool. I don't know. It's a really elegant design. I really want to find a way to use this that just puts it over the top. If you have any ideas, let me know in a comment. Next card here is Stingerback Terror. 2 red and 2 for a 7/7 Scorpion Dragon. Has flying and trample, and it gets -1/-1 for each card in your hand. So it's not going to be great in control. This is for aggro, guys. But in aggro, this is nuts. Like, mono red loves this, right? You just vomit out your whole hand, throw everything at your opponent, and then when you're down to your last card, you use all your mana to play a 7/7 flying trample. And it's only 4, so it's not so expensive that it's just stuck in your hand waiting for more mana to finally play it in a deck like that. Like, you're gonna probably top out at 4 and be fine with this just being the last card and slamming it. So if mono red's looking for a finisher to just get there after it runs out of gas, this is bananas. But it's even better than that, guys, because for 1 red and 2 you can plot it, which means if you don't have or rather, if you do have too many cards in your hand where this isn't going to be very valuable, maybe you think it's going to die to a cut down because it's going to come down and be so small because your hand size is so big or whatever, you can at least plot it into exile if you have nothing better to cast that turn, and then just wait, right? By the time you do cast everything out of your hand, well, now it's sitting there ready to be cast for free onto a board where it can be a 7/7. Just extra gravy that makes it even crazier. Super good in combination with Terror of the Peaks for obvious reasons. Honestly, just kind of love this card. Next up, we have a reprint, but it is one hell of a reprint. This thing, I believe, has only been printed in one set. It may have got one special printing that wasn't in a set outside of that, but to the best of my knowledge, it's only actually been included in one set ever. I forget what set that is, so if you happen to know, let me know in a comment. But Archangel of Tithes, 3 white and 1 for a 3/5 flying angel. Not the greatest body, but still alright. But the abilities are nuts, and they don't look as crazy as they actually are when you first read them. As long as Archangel of Tithes is untapped, creatures can't attack you or planeswalkers you control unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. And then as long as Archangel of Tithes is attacking, creatures can't block unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. So here's why this card is so nuts. Alright, once it's on the battlefield, your opponent has to hold up mana to make sure that your board isn't unblockable. If they completely tap out, then you're able to just swing in with your whole board the next turn, and they can't block. And they'll probably lose. So they have to hold up mana. And if they're holding up mana, it means they're not able to play out as much stuff as you are. You don't have to worry about holding up any mana. You can still spend all of your mana every turn, putting more pressure on the opponent, playing more spells. Your opponent, meanwhile, has to worry about holding up mana, not be tapped out, so that your board isn't unblockable, so they can't keep up with the rate at which you're playing stuff. So you just start to pull ahead further and further and further, and if they want to attack you, it's even harder. It shuts down aggro in that way, where like if they want to swing with their guys, then they can't really cast as much stuff. And if they want to swing at you and not have you crack back unblockable, they have to hold up even more mana, which means they're playing even less things. As far as tempo, it just completely takes over the game. If this can just stay alive for a couple turns, you pull so far ahead in board presence, your opponent just can't deal with it. And eventually you just get there. So I think this card is kind of insane, and the fact that it's an Angel, I am super excited to brew more Angel Tribal. I have an Angel Tribal deck right now that it has been upgraded with the most recent set, Murders at Karlov Manor, and it's pretty good, but I don't feel like it has enough upgrades to be worth putting on the YouTube channel, because we already put up a version not too long ago. I believe it was called Unitology. But yeah, it's not like doesn't have enough cards that are different to feel like I should put it up on the channel again yet, but I love it so much, and I really feel this card, along with maybe one or two of the other Angels we've seen, are good enough to make the cut and finally have a new version that feels new enough of that deck that we can put it up on the channel, and I'm really excited about that. Next card here is Pillage the Bog. This card is gross. This is one of the top 3 cards of the day, and when I first looked at this, I kind of underestimated how good it was. Look at the top X cards of your library. It's 2 mana. 2 mana and Golgari. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is twice the number of lands you control. Put one of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You can also plot it for 3 mana instead of casting it for 2. So, here's the thing. When I first read this, I overlooked the fact that it said twice the number of lands you control. So I was thinking, oh man, this is only good in ramp decks, right? You ramp out a ton of lands, and then this is almost a tutor, which could be really good because you have a bunch of mana in a ramp deck where you can maybe afford to spend an extra 2 mana to just tutor up the thing you want and then still play that bomb that same turn. So I was like, okay, this could be a really cool tutor in ramp. But then I reread it, and I was like, oh, twice the number of lands. If you only have 2 lands out, you're still digging 4 cards, which is kind of the same as Impulse, right? It's an Impulse that isn't in blue for the same amount of mana, except it scales and gets even better. If you get to the point where you have 4 or 5 mana, you can look at the top 8 or 10 cards. At that point, it practically is a demonic tutor, right? Very close to it, and you can also plot it. So if you have something very specific in mind that you want to look for and cast on a very specific turn, you can just plot this for 3, let it sit in exile until it gets to that turn, and then play it for free, dig that many more cards because you waited more turns for more lands to be in play, make sure you find the thing that you're planning on, that you have just enough mana to then cast because this costs 0 to play because you plotted it. So there's some gnarly stuff you can do with this, and it is very close to just being a demonic tutor. It's like, at worst an Impulse, at best a demonic tutor, somewhere in between, with the extra value of potentially being able to plot it. So I think it's a great card. I'm excited to see what kind of decks use it, because I definitely think some decks will be able to put this to better use than others. If you have an idea of a deck you'd want to put it in, let me know in the comments. My second favorite card of the day, Assimilation Aegis. 1 blue, 1 white, and 1 for an artifact equipment. When it enters the battlefield, you exile up to 1 target creature until Assimilation Aegis leaves the battlefield. So, full stop there. It's 3 mana exile removal for any creature. That alone is pretty good as a 3-drop. It's not like, oh my god, but it is, you know, at least on rate, maybe a little bit above rate. It's really good. It is exile. It doesn't trigger death triggers, you know. I think this is great. But the rest of what the card do just makes it completely batshit crazy. Whenever Assimilation Aegis becomes attached to a creature, for as long as it remains attached to it, that creature becomes a copy of a creature card that was exiled with Assimilation Aegis, and it equips for 2. So you're telling me not only do I get your biggest threat off the board, but then I can start equipping it to my token creatures, and turn my token creature into your biggest threat, forcing you to have to deal with it, and when you waste your removal on it, I just equip it to another token creature, and bring it back, and I use your own win condition against you until you run out of removal, and then I just stomp you into oblivion. That sounds amazing. But the fact that even if you're up against a control deck, and they don't really have any creatures to hit, at least not in the early to mid game, Like, you could just cast it on your big threat so that you can start to turn your little guys into that big threat. Maybe you're worried about a Sunfall being cast the next turn, so you play this on your own big guy, and then instead of getting exiled to the Sunfall, it's under your Aegis. So after they Sunfall, you can start making more tokens again and start equipping the Aegis and still have your dude. And if they Sunfall again, you still have your Aegis, and you play more tokens, and you still have your dude. So I love that this is great against mid-range, not useless against aggro, and still good against control. It just kind of makes it good all around, and I love it. I love it to pieces. I'm going to be brewing with this card for sure. It's just so fun. It's just so fun. And the last card of the day, my favorite card of the day, is another round. Yorion ain't got shit on us. 1 white and 2, and double X for a sorcery. Exile any number of creatures you control, then return them to the battlefield under their owner's control, then repeat this process X more times. So, for just the 3 mana, for no X, you get to flicker every single creature you have if you want, which is super powerful in a flicker deck that's designed to take advantage of that, right? But then, every 2 mana you dump into it beyond that, you get to do it again, and get double the ETB triggers, triple the ETB triggers. At 5 mana, you're flickering everything twice. At 7 total mana, you're flickering everything 3 times. And when you flicker them, they're not coming back at end of turn like most flicker spells do these days. They're coming back right away, which is crazy. Like, I love this card. I'm absolutely brewing a flicker deck when this set releases. I've already got one on the channel right now. Check that out if you're interested. But man, this is just going to be so much fun. Like, the amount of ridiculousness you can do with this card. Like, Yorion was everywhere when that card was standard legal, and there's a good reason for that. Like, obviously the big flying body had something to do with it, and the fact that you could, you know, have it as a companion had something to do with that. And so Yorion ultimately, I think, is a better card than this. But all of the insane, gross brokenness of Yorion you can get in this card, and if you have enough mana, this can actually do way more than Yorion. It's a big if, but the potential is there, and that's nutty. But what I love about it is it doesn't matter if you don't have a ton of mana. Even if you just play this for 3 mana and flicker everything, that's still going to be unbelievably good in the decks that want that kind of ability. So the fact that that's the floor and the ceiling just goes up from there, in my opinion, just makes this card bananas. Not only super powerful, but super, super fun. So I'm excited to play with it. If you're excited to play with it, let me know in a comment below. Let me know specifically what creatures you'd want to flicker with this, because there are some gross ones, I'm sure. I can't think of exactly what I would want to on the top of my head, but I will absolutely be brainstorming and brewing. So let me know in a comment if you've got an idea. And with all that out of the way, that's been day 3 of spoilers. This was a long one, guys. I appreciate you. If you stuck around through the whole thing, you are a real one. So let me know in the comments below. Post a comment that says, yo, I'm still here. And I know that you're a real one, and I'll appreciate you. I'll heart that comment because I appreciate everyone that sticks around through the entirety of the video. I know it's long, and so it means a lot to me. If you haven't already, like the video, because I need everybody out there to see these things. It would really help me a lot. And subscribe if you haven't already, because there's so much more on the way, and I'd love for you to be a part of the community. So, thanks so much for hanging out. This has been day 3. It's been my pleasure, and until next time, always make 'em scoop. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.